Amma ba'd, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. It means a lot, alhamdulillah, the brothers and the sisters who came. Me flying from New York City, going through the many trials and tribulations, difficulties and hardships of traveling. If you're in first class, traveling is still qit'atun min adhab. That's a fact. If you're traveling in a private layer, traveling is traveling. And even if you're not going on a very long trip, long distance, crossing on borders, I humbly feel, and Allahu Alam, is that there's still a jet lag, even if it's just an hour away. And the rapidity of the nature of travel by air. You're going hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miles, hundreds and hundreds of feet above. The human body will feel some type of effect from that. All of these different issues taken away from my family, so on and so on and so forth. In actuality, I'm happy. It's my pleasure and it's my honor. And you guys inviting me here, coming and attending, listening, benefiting, asking, you're doing me a favor in reality. And this is what we know as sight versus perception. We see a thing by how we perceive a thing. So the average person, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, scholar, layman, student of knowledge, except for those whom Allah has mercy upon, they're going to look at, I'm doing you a favor by coming here. I'm helping you out. I didn't have to come here. I could be in my warm, comfortable, cozy bed right now, and as we speak, doing eating, sleeping, whatever the case may be. And I have to, go to the airport, so on and so forth. Me speaking to you, talking to you, is for your benefit. I know this, I've studied this, I've read this, I've taught this, etc. That's sight. But perception is different. And that is to learn and to realize is when Allah sends you believers and non-believers as well, who ask of something from you, and you provide some type of service for them or some type of favor to them. In actuality, they're doing you a favor. And that is because they're offering you an opportunity to gain hasanat. They're offering you the opportunity to give what you have to give, no matter how little it may be, such as that which I have to give. And we know that wealth from which zakat is not paid is of no use to its owner. Money that you do not pay zakat for is of no real tangible use. Rather, it is a means of punishment on the day of judgment, as Allah Azza wa Jalla has told us in the Quran. And the same applies to Islamic knowledge. The same applies to Islamic knowledge. If I can't pay zakat on the little bit of knowledge that I've amassed and the few years that I went overseas and studied, what good is that knowledge if I'm not teaching it and spreading it, if I'm not spending it? And who am I going to pay zakat to if no one's listening to me or if no one's in attendance? So in actuality, in reality, you guys are doing me a favor. And I should be thanking you. And I should be happier and I should be more honored by you listening and sitting than vice versa. Sheikh came, he came, mashallah, mashallah. But in actuality, I should be saying, mashallah, mashallah. But this isn't for surface thinking. And we want to get too deep. This isn't for people who just see things without perceiving things, without thinking deeply and reflecting in actuality, right? Ibn Sa'di, rahimahullah ta'ala, one day, his students, they came and they brought questions to him. And not only did they bring questions to him, but they brought ishkalat, as we were discussing in the car. They brought to him problematic issues. We don't understand this. How does this make sense? This hadith, this ayah, kayf hada, the madhab, fulan, Imam Ahmed said this. So ishkalat, problems. And then after they asked him those questions, and they brought all those problems to him, so on and so forth, they apologized to him. قَدْ أَكْثَرْنَا عَلَيْكَ يَا شيخ, معلش, afwan. Forgive us, we've overburdened you, we've put too much upon you, etc., etc., etc. And Ibn Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, that's when he said, نَحْنُ مَمْنُونَ بِكُلِّ مَا تَأْتُونَنَا بِهِ مِنَ الْأَسْئِلَةِ وَالْإِشْكَالَاتِ أو كما قال رحمه الله. He said, in reality, we're the lucky ones. We're the blessed ones. All of the questions and problems and the burdens that you bring to us, we're fortunate. We've been blessed by Allah for us to be placed in this position and for Allah to use us to provide some type of service and some type of benefit. But that's not for the average Joe. It's not for the person who just wants to scratch the surface, but it's only for someone who wants to think deeper than that, like a coach. In reality, the students thank the coach. Thanks, coach. You're there for us. You help us out. You gave us a chance to play. You allowed me to fulfill my dreams, blah, 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 blah. But the real coach, he knows Allah put me in the lives of these young men and women. And anybody could be in this position, abusing them, exploiting them, misleading them, misguiding them, doing all types of bad things to them, exerting his power on them. But for a coach to be in charge of the free time, the recreation, the playtime of young men and women, that's a serious honor. And that says a lot about you. And it says a lot about the parents who send their children towards you. So in reality, he's saying, I'm blessed and I'm fortunate by being your coach, not the opposite. Thanks, coach. No, thank you for being my player. All right. So, bidnillahi ta'ala, with regards to selected readings, mukhtarat, selected readings from the book ad-Daa wad-Dawaa, or al-Jawab al-Kafi, the illness and the cure, the disease and the medicine, spiritual illness, al-Jawab al-Kafi liman sa'ala an ad-Dawaa al-Shafi, the sufficient answer for he who asks about the healing remedy. Well, I have a personal story with this book. This is not my copy. Alhamdulillah, one of the young disciples was generous enough to share it with me. Well, alhamdulillah, may Allah reward him for that. This isn't my copy of the book. My journey with this book began at a very young age. And this is also another blessing of Allah upon me. The first time I was exposed to this book, I think I was either 17 or 18. I was in Philadelphia. I wasn't in Medina. I wasn't in Yemen. I wasn't in Islamic University. I was about 17 or 18 in Philadelphia. And it was my teacher, my friend, Sheikh Abu Su'ad Musa. He was back from Saudi for a short period of time. He was in Kulayt al-Hadith. And he had books that he was reading, teaching. And he had books that he was selling. And this was one of those books, ad-Daa wad-Dawaa. And I remember the first time he gave me the book and he handed me the book. And since then, the book has always had a very special place in my heart. Alhamdulillah, read through the book, taught the book, explained the book, so many different classes, lectures, directly quoting from it. Let alone the indirect influence of the book and the indirect influence of the author upon me. So this book has always had a special place in my heart. The author is always and has a special place in my heart, let alone the rest of his books. And Ibn Qaim, may Allah have mercy upon him, is definitely, if not my favorite Islamic personality. And if he's not the absolute favorite, definitely in the top 3, top 2, as far as scholars after the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, etc. All right? So this book here, like many other books of the author, and like the books of his teacher, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah be pleased with him, in actuality, the book is a fatwa. The book is nothing more than a question and an answer. Someone comes to him, yeah, Shaykh, what's the ruling on such and such? Can I do such and such? I have such and such a problem. I have such and such an issue. In my country, people say this. People are doing this. People believe this. People say Allah can't have this attribute. There is no qadr, etc., etc., etc. And the alim, he says, come and sit and let me explain it to you. And he either dictates it, or he just speaks and someone writes it down, or he himself sits down between Dhuhr and Asr, or one day, or 1 week, or 2 hours, 4 hours, and writes the answer. And the answer that he wrote wasn't necessarily intended to be a book, but it was intended to be correspondence. Here's my answer to you. You asked him about one thing, and one sentence, one paragraph, this is the answer. And upon the death of the author, or the author decided to turn it into a book, or the book was found, it was discovered, etc., the people, they edit the book, annotate the book, publish and print the book. And then we have a book. and we memorize, we translate, we explain, we give classes from it. But in actuality, it was a fatwa. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is for you to understand the dynamic nature of Ibn Qayyim and the dynamic nature of this book. Number two is that when you read this book and the contents of this book, it will help you to help yourself. It will help you to help yourself. When you know that something is someone else's problem, or it was someone else's problem, it makes it easier for you and your own problems. Versus a book which is just theory. Some sheikh is talking about this, spirit of Allah, that's it. When you say, whoa, that was a real person who had the same problem that I have. He lived 500 years ago, 700 years ago. He lived in a different country. He spoke a different language. The world was different back then. But the same thing that he asked about is the same thing that I'm going through. It's the same thing that I had to struggle with. It's the same thing that I had to deal with when I was becoming a Muslim, or when I started praying, when I started wearing hijab, etc., etc. So human beings were creatures of relativity. We like to relate. And that's why they say misery loves company. That's a fact. Misery loves company. When someone is miserable, sad, they want others to feel the same as well. And this is one of the main reasons behind hasad, envy. I suffered, I went through this, I want you to go through the same. And this is also one of the main reasons behind abuse. The different levels and the different types of abuse. Whatever level of abuse it is. I was abused when I was younger. My innocence was taken away from me. So now, you can't keep it. You can't have it. That's not, no, you got to go through what I went through. And the same applies with regards to healing and remedying. Getting out of an issue, getting out of a problem, recovering from something, it's easier when you have people that are similar around you. And it's easier to relate to another human being. And this is why Allah Azza wa Jalla makes certain men and women role models. Role models. We read about the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. We read about the Sahaba. We read about Imam Ahmed. But I need someone in Minneapolis. Someone whose hand I can touch and grab. Someone I can see eat and drink and walk down the street to be my role model, to go do the right thing, to become a scholar of Islam, etc., etc., etc. So when you know the history behind a book, where the book came from, why the book was written, that allows you to have a better understanding of the book, a better appreciation of the book, and it allows you to deal with the topic of the book, which is spiritual cure. A cure for a disease and an illness, or prevention. And of course, that's the best type of medicine. The best medicine is prevention. The best cure for cancer, the greatest cure for cancer is not getting it. The best cure for a common cold is trying your best not to get it, etc. So this book, it deals with spiritual illness. When the soul becomes sick. When something is included in the soul or the mind that's not supposed to be there. Just like infection, germs. Why does your body give you a fever? Why does your body reject a vaccine? Or why does it reject a kidney or a liver? Why does it reject certain things that you put into it? Because it's what? The body is saying it's not supposed to be here. Something's off. Something's out of balance, out of whack, out of sync. So that's spiritual illness. When there are elements, feelings, thoughts, emotions, let alone acts that are not supposed to be that way. So how do I prevent spiritual illness? And if I've fallen into some spiritual sickness, how do I get rid of it? How do I save myself? If that's even possible. If that's even possible. So that's what the book is about. A man came to the author, Ibn Qayyim, and he explained to him some of his problems and some of his issues. And Ibn Qayyim, may Allah have mercy upon him, he was kind enough and generous enough to answer the question. So b'idhnillahi ta'ala, before we get into the selected parts, first and foremost is, and it's a very important piece of advice to all students of knowledge and anyone who's reading a book, is that the first thing you should do when you get any book, two things. Number one, read the introduction. Read the preface, read the prologue, read the monologue, whatever it's called. Number two, read the table of contents, read the index. How many people do this? Most people, if and when they buy a book, they may flip through it, put it back down, or put it on the shelf. Many people, even if they read the entire book, they skip the what? They skip the introduction, and most people don't read the index. Most people only use the table of contents or the index when they're looking for something. But honestly, ask yourself, when's the last time I bought a book? I read the intro, and I read every main point that's in the book. So that's the first thing that you want to do with this book and any other book. And you'll be shocked. The powerful effects, the powerful impact of something so simple and basic can make on your life with a book. Never allow a book to be put on the shelf without doing at least those two things. Now, and if you can do a third thing, which is to skim through the book briefly, peruse through the book, then that's even better. Fourthly, if Allah blesses you, if you're truly dedicated, if you're a true bookworm, which every student of knowledge should be, and every disciple of hadith should be a bookworm, then of course you can't lose. I read the intro, I read the index, I read this, the summary, and I read the whole book. And if not, then at least skim through it. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. You understand? That's the weakest level of faith when it comes to faith in a book. You get the point I'm trying to make, all right? Right. So, Ibn Qaim, may Allah have mercy upon him, as we all know, even in English, he's an author and he's a scholar, which is considered to be a specialist of the heart and of the soul. Oftentimes you find Ibn Qaim dealing with issues pertaining to the heart and pertaining to the soul. That which some Muslims call tazkiyah, or that which some Muslims name raqa'iq, heart-softening topics. And in the modern times, in the modern age, people, they say Islamic psychology. Islamic psychology. There are many people who've written books dealing with and discussing the things that he spoke on hundreds of years ago, and they label it as Islamic psychology, meaning mental illness. And there's a connection, of course, the mind and the soul. They're connected. They're connected. They aren't the same, but they are connected. And they're connected heavily. So therefore, Ibn Qaim, rahimahullah ta'ala, all of the things that he spoke on, all of the things that he discussed, he had a special attention and expertise in the matters of the soul and of the mind. Now, after or before you read the introduction of the author, if there's someone who's an editor, or someone who placed notes, or someone who translated, you want to read their introduction as well. Read their introduction as well. And this copy, this edition, is by the late Sheikh Ali Hassan al-Halabi, may Allah have mercy upon his soul, Ameen. He says in the introduction, فإن كتاب الداء والدواء للإمام العلامة ابن قيم الجوزية رحمه الله تعالى من أهم وأعظم ما صنف في باب الأخلاق والتربية وتزكية النفوس. He says this book here of the great erudite, the great scholar of Islam, Ibn Qayyim, is from the greatest and the most profound books in the history of Islam, written on akhlaq, moral character, and written on tarbiyah, cultivation, and written on tazkiyat an-nufus, purification of the souls. فَتَرَاهُ يَتَكَلَّمُ عَنِ الدُّعَاءِ وَأَهْمِيَّتِهِ وَالْحَاجَةِ إِلَيْهِ وَصِلَتِهِ بِالْقَدْرِ. In this book, you find the author discussing the following topics. Number one, dua, supplication, the importance of supplication, the need of supplication, and the connection between supplication and qadr. Once, I was at a conference years ago. I was asked by a young Muslim, rather his father came up to me first, his father and his mother. And they were from a different race of my race. Not saying that it means anything, but that's the story as it was. They're from a different neighborhood, different background, total different lifestyle. They came up to me and they said, "Ya Sheikh, would you be kind enough to answer a question of my son? He has a question that's bothering him." I said, "Sure, no problem." So he said, "Why do Muslims make dua if everything's pre-decreed? What's the purpose of making dua if it's qadr? If Allah decrees for me to die tonight, what's the purpose of me making dua for protection against poison or getting in a car accident? If it's decreed for my child to come out in a certain manner, what's the dua for me to make before I get married and go to my wife? What's the purpose?" So obviously the parents, they didn't have an answer. They were dumbfounded. And some of the other brothers around, they were like, "Oh man, that's a serious question." And of course there were some that were trying to, tell the boy, "Shh, you can't ask a question like that. We as Muslims, etc." So I tried my best to explain it to him. My brother-in-law, one of my brother-in-laws, he was with me at the time. He jumped in. He said, "What do you mean? Dua is the weapon of the believer. That's the backbone, etc., etc., etc." And I tried my best to explain it to the young man, the importance, the need, and the necessity of dua, and that which is meant for us is unknown to us. What's important is that the author speaks on the connection between dua and between qadr. And that in itself is a lecture. A lecture. Do you believe that everything is written and meant to be? Do you really believe that deep down inside? Do you believe that you're powerless? La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Do you really believe that? Or do you believe that you yourself are in control? And when you make dua to Allah, do you make dua despairing? I know this is going to happen already, but let me make dua anyway. I know I'm going to fail the test, let me make dua anyway. There's no chances of me passing the exam, let me just make dua. Or do you make dua, "Oh Allah, allow me to pass the test. Even though something happened, something went wrong, I couldn't study, whatever. Allah, please protect them from capturing me, from locking me up." Do you really make dua sincerely? Even though you know that when you get to that border, or you get to that exam, or whatever you're going through, whatever's written for you is going to take place. Now that's a discussion in itself. The connection between dua and qadr. The Muhaqqiq Shaykh Al-Halabi rahimahullah, he says, وَتَرَاهُ يَتَكَلَّمُ عَنِ الْمَعَاصِي وَأَضْرَارِهَا وَالذُّنُوبِ وَالشُّؤْمِهَا ثُمَّ يُطِيلُ فِي ذَلِكَ جِدًّا رَحِمَهُ اللَّهِ. And then you see the author speaking on sins, the harms of sins, evil acts, misdeeds, and the shu'm, the evil nature of sins and their bad effects. And he speaks on this, he says, ثُمَّ يُطِيلُ. He speaks on this at length. وتراه يتكلم عن العقوبات الشرعية والقدرية القلبية والبدنية الدنيوية والأخروية. And you also find the author speaking on the punishments of sins. Punishments in the deen, the sharia, and punishments in the universe. Things that take place that Allah decrees upon people because of their sins. Punishments of the heart, punishments of the body, punishments pertaining to this world and of the hereafter. وتراه يتكلم عن الشرك وأقسامه في العبادة في الأفعال في الأقوال في الإرادات والنيات ثم الشرك النصارى والشرك الذين يتخذون الوسائط والشفعاء. And you also find the author speaking on shirk, its types, its categories, shirk in worship, shirk in statements, shirk in actions, and shirk of one's intentions. And when we talk about spiritual disease, spiritual illness, it's impossible to separate it from shirk. Why are people connected to the dunya? Why can't people stop doing this sin? Because they have shirk with them. A little or a lot. Minor or major. And you talk to people, they worship money. Literally. They worship sports. Literally. They worship their desires. Literally. They offer sacrifices. They sacrifice themselves. They sacrifice their bodies. Young men, young women. They sacrifice their bodies for things that they may not necessarily call a deity, but in reality, it's a deity. And from that are all other things, such as a tattoo, and other things as well, which we're not going to get into right now. And then he speaks on the shirk of the Christians, and the shirk of those who take middlemen between themselves and Allah. وتراه يتكلم عن الكبائر ومفاسدها فذكر الظلم والقتل والزنا. And he also speaks on the major sins, the chief sins, the cardinal sins, and the harms and the cons of those sins. He mentioned oppression, murder, fornication, etc. وتراه يتكلم عن مداخل المعاصي من الخطرات واللفظات والخطوات. And then you find authors speaking on how people fall into sins. Does it just happen at once, overnight? Or are there steps? There's a process, thoughts, statements, and actual footsteps. The means that you take to disobey Allah. وتراه يتكلم عن اللواط وعن وطء البهيمة وعن مراتب الحب وعن مفاسد عشق الصور. And you'll also find authors speaking on homosexuality and bestiality and the levels of love and passion and obsession and infatuation. And you find the author speaking on the harm of attachment to images and idols, portraits, icons. How old is Ibn Qayyim? What century did he live in? He spoke on homosexuality, its reality, its ruling, its danger, its harm. Homosexuality, 2021, in which my young innocent son, my young innocent daughter is bombarded, aerial bombardment, my young child, of homosexuality. There's not a cartoon, there's not diaper, baby bib, bottle, action figure, one way or another, in which there's some type of propaganda to brainwash and to program and to teach my son, my daughter, it's okay to be like this and to be like that. Let alone, if you don't stand with us, then you're automatically against us. Let alone this and that, sports, basketball, so on and so on and so on. We're talking about homosexuality back then. Imagine now. And which, unfortunately, we have Muslims who have the nerve and have the audacity to sit in front of a camera on a television station and say there's nothing wrong with homosexuality in Islam. And there's nothing wrong with being a homosexual Muslim. And there's no proof in the Quran, no hadith, nothing textual stating the impermissibility of homosexuality. La ilaha illallah. That's the state of affairs of the Ummah today, in which that is acceptable speech. And others who say things worse than that, etc. So he spoke on the concept of homosexuality back then. وَعَنْ وَطْءِ الْبَهِيمَةِ and other things as well. وَعَنْ مَرَاتِبِ الْحُبِّ. There was no internet in Ibn Qayyim's days. There was no internet. There was no IG. There was no live stream on Facebook. There was no internet pornography in the time of Ibn Qayyim. Rather, did Ibn Qayyim have a printing press? How old is the printing press? Do you know how long it took for a book to be made in those days? Do you know how much work was needed? Do you know how many craftsmen were needed for parchment? Parchment. You know where parchment comes from? You need one who dyes it, who dries it, who cuts it, who writes it, who colors it, who illuminates it, who binds it. You need 10 craftsmen, 10 artisans back in those days to put together a what? A book. You know how expensive it was to get a book? Only the elite people had books. And that's why there was widespread illiteracy. It's not like today. So in Ibn Qayyim's times, there was no internet. There were no magazines. There were no this and there was no that. For a person to have an image and a picture, an icon of some type of sexuality, how do you think you could hide that from your parents, right? You think you can hide that from your parents? Versus passcode, Retina. I have a way of preventing people from getting onto my phone. This is locked, this is coded, this is put up, so on and so on and so on and so forth. So if he spoke about ishq suwa, people being attached to images, obsessed with images. Imagine 2021 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, how many of us How many of our children, our teenagers, have become fiends and addicts of images and other things? Ibn Qaim, he says, or Shaykh Ali Halabi, he says, وغير ذلك كثير مما توسع في ذكره وأفاض في إيراده من لطائف العلم وحقائقه وبيان محاسبة النفس ومراقبتها ما لا يستغني عنه طالب العلم. He says, and many other things that he spoke on in his book in detail, precise fineries of ilm, bringing the soul to account, watching the soul, being mindful of the soul, that which no student of knowledge can do without. He says that this book is indispensable for a talibul ilm. طيب. The actual author, he starts off by saying, or his student says, سئل الشيخ والإمام العلامة المتقن الحافظ الناقد شمس الدين أبو عبد الله محمد بن الشيخ تقي الدين أبي بكر المعروف بابن قيم الجوزية زاده الله من فضله ما تقول السادة العلماء أئمة الدين رضي الله عنهم أجمعين في رجل ابتلي ببلية وعلم أنها إن استمرت به أفسدت عليه دنياه وآخرته وقد اجتهد في دفعها عن نفسه بكل طريق فما يزداد إلا توقدا وشدة فما الحيلة في دفعها وما الطريق إلى كشفها فرحم الله من أعان مبتلى والله في عون العبد ما كان العبد في عون أخيه أفتنا مأجورين رحمكم الله. So the author, he was asked about a man who's afflicted, who has a problem, who has an issue about something that he knows, and istamarrat bihi. If this illness stays, if it remains, if I keep this cancer in my body, my liver, my pancreas, my colon, my breast, it will ruin everything. How to get away from it, how to stay away from it, how to rid myself from it, how to cure my ill, broken soul. What do the scholars of Islam say about a man as such? What do you say about a man as such? What's the disease? For spiritual illness. Whatever that illness may be, whatever sin it may be, etc. So that's the question that was presented to him. And obviously that's only one paragraph. And in response to that one question, he wrote, everybody understand? He wrote this based off of that. Everybody got it or not? All right. So let's briefly read from the index. And then inshallah ta'ala, you guys can pick which chapter you would like to read from or skim through, etc. So first and foremost, he says, or it says, فَصْلٌ ad-Dawaa dawa'un. That dua, supplication itself is a cure. Ad-Dawaa or al-ilha'u fi dua. How to make dua properly. Do you make dua with a weak heart, a weak spirit? Do you make dua asking Allah, maybe, if you want to forgive me, O Allah? Maybe, or do you plead and beg and implore Allah on your hands and your knees, asking Him, begging Him over and over again, not quitting and not giving up when you make dua? Then it says, isti'jalu istijabati dua, rushing and hastening for your dua to be answered. Awqatul istijaba, when is dua answered? Min asrar ad-dua, secrets of dua. Ad-dua ka-silah, dua is like a weapon, a sword. بين الدعاء والقدر, dua and the pre-decree. أوهام في الدعاء, misconceptions that people have about dua. People think things or believe things about dua which isn't the case. It's a misconception. بين عفو الله وأمره, Allah forgiving and Allah commanding. And he mentions many other things. Then he speaks on having hope for Allah and being deceived. And then he talks about the harms of sins. Jumlatan wa tafsilan. Explicitly and inexplicitly. The harms of sins in general and the harms of certain sins and certain acts. He says, ضرر الذنوب والمعاصي الآثار القبيحة للمعاصي المعاصي يولد بعضها بعضا المعاصي تضعف القلب المعاصي تسلخ القلب عن استقباحها المعاصي سبب لهوان العبد شؤم الذنوب. He talks about how sins beget further sins. You started off smoking this, now you're smoking that. You started off with one girlfriend, now you started off killing one person, shooting one person. Next you know, you killed 5 people. You started off doing a county bid, now you know what? Doing federal time. You started off stealing this, now you're extorting that. You started off sucking your teeth to your mother, now you're cursing her, saying bad things about her. You started off watching this, softcore, now you're addicted to the hardcore stuff. Sins beget other sins. You do one sin, one disobedience, and it leads to further sins. And in most cases, not just further sins, but the hole gets deeper and darker. Deeper and darker. And you don't realize how far you've strayed. How far you've strayed, like we mentioned earlier. Most people who commit murder, they turn themselves in. They can't live with it. It's on their conscience. They have nightmares. They walk past the person's mother. She's crying. My son got shot. Some monster killed my son, shot my son, regardless whether the son was wrong or right. Son violated, but the mother, she's not thinking about that. The money that my son took, is my son, who's now full of bullets. He walks past the mother and he actually feels bad. I don't feel bad for him. Okay, this is the mindset, right? He deserved what he got, but I feel bad for his mom. I feel bad for his little sister. I feel bad for everybody. Dang, that's messed up. That's crazy. But the second time you kill, third time you kill, fourth time you kill, you become a killer. Then it's what? It's just a scratch. No biggie. And that is why gangs, oftentimes, when they bring in an initiate, a new recruit, the first thing they do is to break your sensitivity. Thing number one, you have to lose your fitra. Don't look at it as a bad thing. In order to be initiated, you have to lose out on the pain, on the feeling. So one person, 3 people, 5 people, 10 people, next thing you know, my soul is gone and it's lost. And that's from the harms of sins. Then he talks about humiliation and disgrace. He speaks on how sins ruin a person's mind. Sins place a heel upon the heart. Sins bring upon the curse of Allah. Sins are a reason behind the dua of the angels not being made for you. And the messenger as well. And he talks about corruption. He talks about lack of jealousy. He talks about lack of shyness. Disrespect to Allah. Allah abandoning and forgetting his slave. He speaks on sins preventing you from reaching ihsan. And ta'budullaha ka'annaka tarahu. The sinner he'll never reach the pinnacle of Islam. He'll never worship Allah as though he sees Allah. And he'll never run. It's gone, it's taken from him. His Islam at best will be basic, will be mediocre. And then the author, he speaks on how you miss out on so many good opportunities. The heart becomes weaker and weaker. Blessings are stripped and taken away. Fear, paranoia, lack of istiqamah, blindness of the heart. And he talks about tusaghiru nafsa wa tuhaqqiruha. Sins make a person seem and feel inferior. You can't have the true confidence when you're a habitual sinner. You always feel less and weak and small. Ibn Qaim rahimahullah ta'ala, he then speaks on al-ma'asi sabumun fi asr al-shaytani wa sijn al-shahawat. Sins incarcerate you, they lock you up. You become a prisoner of your lusts. When you want to stop, you can't stop. You want to make an attempt to do the right thing, you're stuck, you're trapped. And the sins, the addiction, it says, you're not going anywhere. You're not leaving. You can't leave. And the reason why you can't leave is that you become too comfortable. You stayed here too long. If you checked in and checked out really quick, it's one thing. Somebody that lives with you for some time, do you want them to leave you? Or do you feel attached to them? Sheikh, you were here for 3-4 days, you might as well what? Stay another day. Is this not what they say on a Dawah trip? We'll book the flight the next day. You might as well move to Minneapolis. Is this not the case? You might as well come out here. Someone that you get accustomed to, you don't want them to leave. As far as someone is quick in and out, it's a different story. I'm landing on Thursday. I have to travel back on Friday afternoon. Sheikh, can't you stay longer? No, I'm sorry, I can't. I have responsibilities there. You're not going to get attached. But if I come here, I'm eating, I'm sleeping, I'm traveling, we're riding around, we're doing this, next thing you say, what? Sheikh, you can't what? You can't go, you can't leave. And that's the concept of lusts, is that the lusts, they ensnare you. And the reason why they ensnare you is because you've allowed them to stay put for such a long time. And then when you try to leave, it's what? They say, what? Not so fast. And then he goes on to explain this in detail. As the author, or as the annotator has summarized, and as he mentioned in the introduction. So that's what the book is. That's what the book is about. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala, if you guys want to speak on or discuss or have me mention some of these chapters or points from these chapters, inshallah ta'ala, you can pick what you guys think is most important and most relative or most thought-provoking. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surely knows best. Blindness of the heart, okay? That's the first vote. Homosexuality. Loss of opportunities. Fawatul khair. You losing out. You becoming a loser. That's the ultimate loser. A loser is a person who lost out on the opportunity to be better. He had higher potential. You're not supposed to be here working here. You're not supposed to be selling this. You want fries with that? You're not supposed to be asking that question. Not you. You had the opportunity, what? To go higher, to be more, to be bigger, to be greater. And now you ask somebody, would you like to add fries? Or you want a bigger drink? You understand the example I'm trying to mention? There's some people, and there's nothing wrong with working at a fast food place if that's, it's better than nothing. There's some people whose minds, they can't get beyond that. They don't have the physical capability to do more than that. But you actually had the ability, what? To go higher. And now you're saying, would you like to add a larger size for 50 cents? Fawatul khair. You missed out on an opportunity. You messed up because of bad friends, because you want to smoke weed, because you want to hang out with this person and that person and this one and that one. So now the good opportunities of what? Fatat, yani, is over. You squandered your chance. Type, anybody else? Fadl akhi. Decrease of knowledge. You can't obtain knowledge through sins. Type. Anybody else? Brothers or sisters? Proper dua. What's the adab, the etiquette of dua, the dynamic of dua? Anybody else? How to stay motivated. Tayyib. Anybody else? Steadfast, istiqamah. How sins come between you and istiqamah. Khair, inshallah. All right. So on page 117, we'll start off with the first suggestion, and that was blindness of the heart. Now, Bismillah. Ibn Qaim rahimahullah, he says, فصل, or he says, ومن عقوباتها أنها تعمي بصيرة القلب وتطمس نوره وتسد طرق العلم وتحجب موارد الهداية. وقد قال مالك للشافعي لما اجتمع به ورأى تلك المخايل: إني أرى الله تعالى قد ألقى عليك نورا فلا تطفئه بظلمة المعصية، ولا يزال هذا النور يضعف ويضمحل، وظلام المعصية يقوى حتى يصير القلب مثل الليل البهيم، فكم من مهلك يسقط فيه، أو كم من مهلك يسقط فيه وهو لا يبصره، كأعمى خرج بالليل في طريق أو طريق ذات مهالك ومعاطب، فيا عزة السلامة ويا سرعة العطب. He says sins cause blindness of the heart, and the sins put out the light or the fire of the heart. Obviously fire being a form of light in a way of like a torch. It's the water or the ash that puts the torch out. And if you don't have a torch walking through a dark cave back in the day, if you don't have your headlights on your car, you're going to do what? You're going to crash. You'll run into a pit. You'll run off the road. You ever drive somewhere late at night, like way out in the middle of nowhere, and stop and cut your lights off? We used to do that when we were going from the Red Sea, Jeddah, or Yembut back to Medina. We used to do that. We would take different trips, pull on the side of the road, cut the lights off, or on the actual road, just for a couple of seconds, maybe a couple of minutes, cut off the lights. And the roads there are not like the roads here. The reflectors, this and that, and you see nothing but what? Total blackness. Is it a curve? Is it this? You don't know where you're going. Imagine how scary that would be. Driving full speed with no lights. And that's the example of the habitual sinner. The light of his heart becomes dimmer, dimmer, darker, until it's what? And then he falls into something. He crashes into something, and he doesn't even realize. And that in itself is profound. Qaim. What else did we mention from your guys' requests? I'm sorry? Homosexuality. May Allah protect us and prevent us from that. Protect our children as well. Page number 241. The author, he says here, ولما كانت مفسدة اللواط من أعظم المفاسد كانت عقوبته في الدنيا والآخرة من أعظم العقوبات وقد اختلف الناس هل هو أغلظ عقوبة من الزنا أو الزنا أغلظ عقوبة منه أو عقوبتهما سواء على 3 أقوال فذهب أبو بكر الصديق وعلي بن أبي طالب وخالد بن الوليد وعبد الله بن الزبير وعبد الله بن عباس وجابر بن زيد وعبد الله بن معمر والزهري وربيعة بن أبي عبد الرحمن ومالك وإسحاق بن راهويه والإمام أحمد في أصح الروايتين عنه والشافعي في أحد قوليه إلى أن عقوبته أغلظ من عقوبة الزنا وعقوبته القتل على كل حال محصنا كان أو غير محصن. He says homosexuality, since it is such a grave offense, since it is such a formidable crime, the punishment for homosexuality is from the most grave and most formidable, from the most ugly of punishments in this world and in the hereafter. In other words, fire is fought with fire. He says, since homosexuality is such a grave crime, the punishment for it in this world and in the hereafter is equally matched. And then he mentions a very interesting issue here, and that is what the scholars have to say concerning the punishment of homosexuality. The punishment of homosexuality. What is the punishment of homosexuality? Male or female, virgin, non-virgin, married or not? And that punishment, is it worse than the punishment of zina? Or is it equal to the punishment of zina? Or is the punishment for homosexuality similar to that of a zina? We as Muslims, we don't need to give this lecture. We should already know that Islam is not just a religion. Islam is not just a one-day faith. It's not a one-week faith. It's not a monthly faith or a yearly faith. But it's something that pertains to our way of life and our way of death. And a big part of life is crime. And a big part of society is crime. Our country, the country in which we live, there lies no doubt, it prides itself because of many advancements. And from the advancements with which it prides itself is what? Is the criminal system, and the penal system, the legal system, the judiciary system. There's safety. You can't just walk around with a gun. There are police officers. They're supposed to protect you and serve you. You have right to a fair trial. We just don't throw you in a dungeon and don't read you your rights, etc., etc. Is this not the case? So they themselves acknowledge that crimes and offenses do, can, and will happen. And there are levels of enforcement, judgment, sentencing, redemption, punishment, etc., etc. And if America had a military, had a navy, if America had doctors, if America had an agricultural system, an economic system, educational system, recreational system, but it didn't have a system set up for crimes and criminals, would it be a complete country? Would it be a nation to call itself a superpower or to pride itself? Of course it wouldn't. Complete system of life has to speak on something like this. Similarly, Islam is supposed to be a complete system of life. So people say, why is this even mentioned in Islam? Well, that's brutal, or that's barbaric, or that's medieval, or that's harsh, or that's inhumane, or that's misogynist, or that, or that, or that. Whether you agree not, your faith is based off of one day out of the week, not ours. Your faith is faith. Your religion is your religion. Ours is a way of life and death. So a big possibility, unfortunately, is this crime. So there are punishments for it. So Ibn Qaim, rahimahullah, he mentions the different views from the scholars of Islam with regards to the crime and the punishment of a person who's caught in homosexuality. And it's a very interesting fact that he mentions, he says, is that homosexuality is capital punishment. Muhsanan am ghayra muhsan. Whether a person was married or not. And we know zina, the punishment for zina is not the same. One who breaks his virginity making zina is not like someone who was married before. There's a difference, a thayyib and the muhsan. So due to the fact that it's capital punishment, he says, that proves it's worse. Something's off. Khair inshallah. Then he goes on to speak on what is the punishment of homosexuality. And he speaks on the history of homosexuality. And he speaks on the harms and the dangers of homosexuality and how it is not a natural thing. It isn't something which is normal and natural. It's not. Khair inshallah. And there are many, many other points of discussion that he talks about with regards to the harms and the dangers of homosexuality. Now, whether we like it or not, the society is the society in which we live. It surrounds us. It envelops us. Unfortunately, it hovers above us. Our children, only Allah knows how things will be in 10, 20, 30 years. How we grew up and how they're growing up. It's like night and day. And we ask Allah for protection. Ameen. Khair inshallah. What, any other suggestions? Proper dua. All right. He speaks on page 16, the beginning of the book. And that's very important to show you and to teach you that the strongest pill in your spiritual cabinet is dua. That's supposed to be the starting point for any cure or therapy. It's sound dua. And of course, a dua wal ibadah. So the author, he says, wad-Dawaa min anfa' al-adwiya wa huwa adu al-bala yudafi'uhu wa yu'alijuhu wa yamna'u nuzulahu wa yarfa'uhu aw yukhaffifuhu idha nazala wa huwa silahu al-mu'min كما روى الحاكم في صحيحه من حديث علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم الدعاء سلاح المؤمن وعماد الدين ونور السماوات والأرض وله مع البلاء ثلاث مقامات أحدها أن يكون أقوى من البلاء فيدفعه الثاني أن يكون أضعف من البلاء فيقع عليه البلاء فيصاب به العبد ولكن قد يخففه وإن كان ضعيفا الثالث أن يتقاوما وَيَمْنَعَ كُلُّ وَاحِدٍ مِّنْهُمَا صَاحِبَهُ. He says that dua is from the most beneficial types of medicine. From the most beneficial ways of cure and remedy is dua. He says, and dua is the weapon of the believer. It's his sword, his shield, his polearm, his spear. That's his weapon. And in modern times, what people use as weapons as well. He says it cures and it fixes, and it also prevents and removes. It relieves. And if it doesn't take it away, if it doesn't prevent it, then at least it will lessen the impact of the blow. It would take away the harshness and the severity of the illness and of the disease. Then he mentions a hadith to support that. And then he says that dua, when it comes on a collision course with bala, trial, tribulation, problems, one of three things is going to happen. Option A, is the dua is going to be stronger than the problem, the issue. And obviously the dua will what? Knock it out. Like a collision. A Mack truck and a small convertible. No comparison, right? The small convertible is going to be smashed, turned into a tin can, flipped off the side of the road, etc. And the Mack truck may walk away with a scratch, if any. Number two is that the bala, the harm or the problem, the sin, whatever it is stronger than the dua. Obviously, the dua, unfortunately, will be ineffective. But he says, at least the dua will lessen the bala, will lessen it. And number three is for the dua and the bala to be equal, in equal strength. And it will be a stalemate. It will be a draw. No one will win. Two people of equal strength, equal size, equal speed, they run and they collide with each other and they just fall back. They bounce back like rubber. Ask yourselves the question, which of the three categories do the problems in your life and the du'as that you make fall under? Or when you make dua, is it stronger than your problems? Or is your stress and your worry and your problems, your drama in life stronger than your dua? That's a serious question for each and every one of us. Then he speaks on al-ilha, begging Allah. And he speaks on not being hasty. And he speaks on the times in which you should make dua. The times in which a person is supposed to make dua. And this is what I want to read. He says, وَإِذَا جُمِعَ مَا الدُّعَاءِ حُضُورُ الْقَلْبِ وَجَمْعِيَّتُهُ بِكُلِّيَّتِهِ عَلَى الْمَطْلُوبِ وصادف وقتا من أوقات الإجابة الستة وهي الثلث الأخير من الليل وعند الأذان وبين الأذان والإقامة وإدبار الصلوات المكتوبات وعند صعود الإمام يوم الجمعة على المنبر حتى تقضى الصلاة من ذلك اليوم وآخر ساعة بعد العصر وصادف خشوعا في القلب وانكسارا بين يدي الرب وذلة وتضرعا ورقة. He says, وذلة له وتضرعا ورقة واستقبل الداعي القبلة وكان على طهارة ورفع يديه إلى الله وبدأ بحمد الله والثناء عليه ثم ثنى بالصلاة على محمد عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم ثم قدم بين يدي حاجة التوبة والاستغفار ثم دخل على الله وألح عليه في المسألة وتملقه ودعاه رغبة ورهبة وتوسل إليه بأسمائه وصفاته وتوحيده وقدم بين يدي دعائه صدقة فإن هذا الدعاء لا يكاد يرد أبدا ولا سيما إن صادف الأدعية التي أخبر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنها مذنة الإجابة أو أنها متضمنة للاسم الأعظم. Ibn Qaim says, so therefore when the following things are done, in order, properly, he says, then it's almost impossible, for the dua to be rejected. It's almost impossible for Allah not to answer the dua. Now put this on pause for 1 second, guys. Not to take too long, 1 second. Like I said with regards to sight and perception, if you don't get what you asked for, it doesn't mean Allah did not answer your dua. There are different meanings of dua being answered. And some scholars say, and they argue, is that Allah never ever absolutely rejects the dua of his servant. Never. There's no way that the believer walks away with nothing from raising his hands to Allah. But how you see it and how you perceive it. Ibn Qaim, he says, unpause the tape now, he says that it's almost impossible for your dua not to be answered if the following things are done. Number one, he says, is that if the dua is accompanied with حضور القلب وجمعيته وكليته, is that the heart is focused and concentrated. I raise my hands, Ya Allah. Somebody walks by in the masjid, like when people pray, and he's what? You ever see that? You walk into the masjid, you come in and you see a brother, he's praying, and he's what? His eyes moving and flipping back and forth means what? He's not concentrated on one thing. You guys, young guys, you play sports, most of you. One of the most important tools of a successful athlete, let alone a champion, an elite athlete, is what? Concentration. That's a fact in basketball. You must have concentration to make that shot, to make that, to finish that. And remember, you see a replay, they slow it down, and the commentator says, look at that concentration. He knew where the ball was. He did this, he did that. It's not simple, it's not easy. It looks easy to throw it to catch. But you being on the field, adrenaline, tired, this, that, all of those factors, football, and to have that concentration and to catch the ball in the end of the end zone and to place your feet within the end zone before you step out of bounds, that takes a great deal of what? Concentration. So that wide receiver on the football field, or that quarterback, what do you think he's thinking about when he throws the ball? You thinking about what his wife made for dinner? My kids? You think he's thinking about his favorite TV show? Who's watching me? Who's listening to me? He's thinking about one thing and one thing only. So he says, step one for proper dua is concentration. Your heart has to be in one place at one time. It can't be all over the place. What you're asking Allah for, that's the only thing that's on my mind at the moment. He then says, number two, and when the dua is made in one of the special times, one of the preferred times, one of the times which dua is highly, what? Probable, right? This is a time in which, in most cases, 90% chance of rain. May not rain, but what? The chances are what? Extremely high. Versus 20% chance of showers, 30% chance of showers. Take your jacket with you. Pack an umbrella. May rain, may not rain. But someone who watches the forecast and sees 90%, 80% chance of showers, he's going to what? He knows that in most cases, it's going to rain. So there are times in which the Prophet has told us in which our dua is more likely to be accepted during those times. And he says in there 6 times. That's the third, al-thuluthul akhir, the last third of the night. At the time of the adhan, between the adhan and the iqamah, at the end of the 5 mandatory prayers, when Imam ascends the minbar on Friday, and the last hour after Asr. Those are the awqat al-ijabah. He says, and when the dua is accompanied by submissiveness in the heart and a sense of brokenness in front of Allah. Listen to these words. When you stand in front of Allah, or you kneel in front of Allah, you prostrate in front of Allah, do you feel broken? Or do you feel whole? Think about Muslims who make sins. All the sins that they make, they still feel broken. They know that they're broken. They know that it's messed up. They know that they've done wrong. They call upon Allah. They beg Allah. They cry to Allah. Allah, help me, fix me, guide me. Allow me to walk away from this. Allow me to get out of this situation. Versus someone making dua, feeling stiff, feeling Allah is going to answer me. Allah owes me something. Nothing's wrong. There's no way. In kisar, being broken in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not being broken in front of a man, like many people they do. They get on their knees and they beg and they cry a man for something. Please, please, please don't kill me. Please do this. Please let me go. Please accept me. Please draft me. Please do this. You ever seen this before? People beg for money. They humiliate themselves and they feel broken in front of another man. Or in our culture, a man, he gets on his knees. He holds out a box with a ring and says, will you marry me? Being broken in front of people instead of being solid in front of people and broken in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, and a person being humble, not prideful when he makes dua. And if the dua is accompanied by facing the qibla, and if the dua is accompanied by being in a pure state, having wudu, and the dua being accompanied by raising of the hands towards Allah, the Most High. It's permissible to make dua without raising your hands, but it's more virtuous and it's more preferable to raise the hands. And if the dua is accompanied by an introduction, Before the book, an introduction. And that introduction should include the following points. Number one should praise Allah. Laud Allah, make hamd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then send prayers upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then make tawbah and make istighfar before the dua. Ask Allah to forgive you and to wipe away your sins before you ask Him for anything. Then, dakhala ala Allah, He says, let him enter upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahu Akbar. You've been through this door, this, that, this, sit here, wait there, now you're here. You understand what this means? You ever think about a worldly example? You're trying to get to a college, you go and see the president, or the principal, or the head coach, you don't see the head person immediately. Is this not the case? They say, wait here. You're excited, you're nervous. Am I late? Am I too late? Is he going to let me in? And then they bring you to what? Another room, in a hospital, right? You're now in a second waiting room. Someone calls you, did you get in yet? Did you check in the airport? Yeah, I got past the first security thing. I got past this thing. Third, fourth, and the next thing you know, the door's open and say, what? Go in. The person that you idolize, the person that you fear, the person that you had expected to meet your entire life, now you're actually what? You understand this? He says, do this, do that, then ثُمَّ دَخَلَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. Then you enter upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is the time in which you make your what? Your dua. You ask Allah for what you're asking for. With a, he says, أَلَحَ عَلَيْهِ فِي الْمَسْأَلَةِ. Never saying, oh Allah, forgive me if you want to. Inshallah. Like human beings do. Can you help me out, inshallah? If you can't, it's no problem. Is this not the case? They bring a sense of shame. Can you hook me up if you can? If it's not too much, can you pick this up? If it's not a hardship. In other words, it's all right if you want to. You know, you don't have to give it to me. Versus someone who begs and says, please, I need this. Pride could be accompanied by the first, not by the second. The one who says, can I borrow some money? If you ain't got it, don't worry about it. It's cool. I'll figure out a way myself. By me saying, I'll figure out a way to go, I can take care of it myself, it's a little bit of what? A little bit of self-pride, right or wrong? You guys with me or not? Can you take me here? If you can't, don't worry about it. I'll figure it out. No problem, don't worry about it, right? I got it if you can. If it's not too hard. Versus, please, I need you to take me. I need you to pick me up. I have no one else to pick me up. So when you make dua, you never mention these things to Allah. Oh Allah, forgive me if you want. Oh Allah, guide me if you want. Oh Allah, do this if it's not a hardship. You don't say these things to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, then you fear Allah, you hope for Allah, and you mention Allah's names, His attributes, and His tawheed, and there's some type of sadaqah that's given before the dua. When all of these steps of polishing are done, he says, La yakad. The dua 99% of the time will be what? Will be answered. So just stop and think about the dua that we make, laughing, joking, make dua sinning, make dua thinking about other things, what I'm going to eat for dinner, is she home, is he home, who's playing tonight, who's winning, making dua, got a customer coming, except we just make dua all of the time. But how many of us actually make dua with those proper steps, right? That's definitely food for thought. It's definitely food for thought. And that in itself is a lecture series by itself. So you guys get the point. That's the book. The book is in English. I believe there's more than one translation. There's summarized translations and the actual full translations of the book. And those who can't speak Arabic, even if your Arabic is not perfect, as Sheikh Al-Halabi rahimahullah said, لا يستغني عنه طالب العلم. No student of knowledge can do without the book. It's indispensable. All right? We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to allow us to benefit from what we have heard and what we have read. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jalla أن يجعلنا ممن يستمع القول فيتبعون أحسنه, to make us of those who hear and to make us of those who follow the best of what we have heard. We ask Allah Azza wa Jalla to show us the truth as truth and allow us to follow it. And we ask Him to show us the falsehood as falsehood and allow us to stay away from it. This will be the end of our Dawah lecture, whatever you wish to call it. Hopefully it was benefit for everyone tonight, being the night of man, woman, and child. Allah Azza wa Jalla surely knows best. I don't know if there's time for questions. If the brothers and the sisters have questions, I don't mind taking some بإذن طيب. Good.
Inshallah, we'll have the Q&A after.